Yeah. Woo. Phone ringing for the work. They waiting on me like the 15 the first. I'm killing competition, put them bitches in the hearse. Been diagnosed with a sick flow, with a nurse. Yeah, do it for the city, but the hood getting turned. With the money going around like an offering.
Welcome back to another edition of the Bubba Lutz Sports Podcast, everybody. I am your host, Bubba Lutz, and I am here to bring you episode 109 of the podcast, where we're going to be talking about the best stories coming out of this Super Bowl's matchup between the Chiefs and the San Francisco 49ers. Now, before we get into that, welcome. Hello. How you doing? We are joined by Dak Prescott right here. We are also joined by Tony Romo and Marion Barber, along with the Vela of Ezekiel Elliott. Good to have them back on the podcast. Few things we'll run through first is subscribe to the YouTube channel if you haven't already. Thank you for all the support over the first two episodes that are on the channel itself. I think we're at 80 views on the first episode itself, which is ridiculous. I don't even know 80 people at this point. If you're listening to this on Spotify or Apple Podcasts, make sure to follow the podcast on their respective applications. And also, if you can go on anchor.fm/Bubba Lutz, you can actually support the podcast with a subscription of $1, $5, or $10. Once again, thank you so much for the support and the love. Let's get right into it, shall we? Now, for that, look at me, look at us. Look, I got all edged up. You know, I did it myself. Tried it for the first time. It did have some blood in it because that was bad. But look at me. You know, I'm a different breed. I'm a different man. I'm a different culture. Look at me. Ooh, okay. Wearing the Optic jersey. You know, it's all good. It's all love. All right, so let's get right into the story, shall we? First one that I love to talk about is going to be Richard Sherman. Richard Sherman is a tremendous comeback story in this Super Bowl and just in general around sports. You know, you talk about, we were just talking about Kobe earlier in the week. Yeah, he came back from a ruptured Achilles and still played at a high level. Most guys take a long time to recover from a ruptured Achilles or do not come back at all. And speaking of a guy like Richard Sherman, who was in the later part of his career when he tore his Achilles in late 2017 in his last year with the Seattle Seahawks, who knew what this man was going to do? You know, he was going to try out free agency, but who would take a chance on a guy that is past his prime point of his career, assuming that after the ruptured Achilles, he wouldn't be 100% healthy, and it would take a long time for him to get back on the field and be comfortable on the field. And yet, late 2017, right where that era of the Pete Carroll Legion of Boom finally fell apart with Kam Chancellor and Earl Thomas. Kam Chancellor has to retire early. Richard Sherman gets hurt. Earl Thomas is on his way out because he's tired of it. He wants big money. Finds himself to Baltimore a couple years later. And the whole reason why Richard Sherman is a big name is he led the way in the Legion of Boom to their Super Bowl championship in, I believe, 2014 against the Denver Broncos, where they demolished them. I mean, ridiculously demolished them, trounced them in like a 41-6 win. And then not reaching that pinnacle again, reaching into the Super Bowl, but falling short when you should have given in to Marshawn Lynch at the 1-yard line, getting that interception from Malcolm Butler. And they lose to the Patriots just a few years later. And never reaching to that point now. You know, they've always been a playoff push team, a contender. Yet this year spoke volume of another season where, yeah, they can reach the playoffs and it might shock some people. Yet when they go against a really formidable opponent in the NFC, they fall short. And that's exactly what happened in this past season. And, you know, that's kind of the end point for the Seattle Seahawks when they reached a point in 2017 where they're barely making the playoffs, but a lot of those guys aren't happy. All those guys are ready to go, and that defense just doesn't feel the same. It's Russell Wilson's team at the end of the day, and there's nothing around him. It's Russell Wilson against the world. So Richard Sherman was a part of that exit and found himself in free agency after a ruptured Achilles, coming back from that, and San Francisco 49ers in early March of 2018, he joined them, signed with him, and along with that, earlier in the year, Robert Saleh is called as the defensive coordinator for the San Francisco 49ers. Now, a good story there as well, because Robert Saleh was actually a huge part of the defensive scheme in that early 20-teens years where they won the Super Bowl And Richard Sherman and him have a great relationship. For him to actually get back with him after his years in Seattle, that's a great story. That's a great combination relationship to build off of, to go along with your rebuilding stage of the San Francisco 49ers. And you think to yourself, in the 2017 year, that's when the 49ers were losing seasons. They were past the point of Kaepernick, past the point of Jim Harbaugh. It's going to take some time to rebuild. With a new GM, a new head coach, you're going to give them some time. So would Richard Sherman still be a part of that when it came down to when they finally put it all together? He's in his later part of his career. Would he still be in his prime? And from that point on, look at him. He has been still yet one of the best corners in the league, even with the names of Jalen Ramsey, Byron Jones, Xavier Rhodes, like all these guys taking over as the so-called best corner in the league. Yet you still forget about Richard Sherman, who was dominating in the league for so many years. And in this past season alone, in those losing seasons once he joined and then till now, which we'll get into for the 49ers organization itself, think of that. Think of that in itself, that throughout all those years, Richard Sherman has still stayed as one of those best receivers. Look at the NFC Championship alone. Aaron Rodgers never threw to that side of the field where Richard Sherman was. And when he did, one big play that Richard Sherman allowed, and then late in that game when it solidified it, Richard Sherman gets an interception. And he read that ball so well. So you go against a Devontae Adams, you go against some great guys around the league, Richard Sherman has no issues. To go from ruptured Achilles in 2017, less than 3 years ago, and to go from that to be the leader of that defense in the Super Bowl, along with your best coordinator in Saleh, what a great thing to look at. He is the leader emotionally, mentally, physically of this defense. That team needed to rebuild defensively. They had gotten rid of all their Hall of Fame, Patrick Willis players, like their great defensive players, and they found themselves with just Richard Sherman. And they just built young after young player in the draft, in free agency, and they became the best defense in the NFL as of right now. You got guys like Nick Bosa, you got Quan Alexander, you have D4, like all these guys, and a lot of them are young. And yet the fact that we don't have a conversation of how young this team is, and with little to no playoff experience, we don't talk about how they could fall under pressure in the moment. It feels like with Richard Sherman in the helm and Robert Saleh, you don't have to worry about playoff experience. You don't have to worry about being mentally prepared, because those guys will get you mentally prepared. So 3 years ago, less than 3 years ago, it was a matter of Sherman if he would still be in the league. And yet, I'm a strong candidate as to saying that the 49ers will win the Super Bowl, and Richard Sherman could be the MVP if he has a great performance like that, and that he has had in the past, really. So I think that if he can solidify that with a Super Bowl win and an MVP for Richard Sherman, hands down one of the greatest of his position, one of the greatest of all time, definitely worthy of getting his second championship, and definitely worthy of being a Hall of Famer. Second story to talk about, Raheem Mostert, the running back for the San Francisco 49ers. This man has gone through a lot in his somewhat small career in the NFL. In the 2015 draft, goes undrafted, gets picked up by the Eagles, and is immediately cut. And then goes to the Browns and gets, makes the 53-man roster, but then gets cut the next day. On the day that his wife, or his fiance at that time, was having a bridal shower. In the middle of that, he gets cut and breaks down. There's a great story to look at and read about from Raheem Mostert himself on the Players Tribune called Destiny. And he talks about not only the performance he had against the NFC Championship game against the Packers, and then the 6 teams that have cut him, the long seasons he's had of not playing and being the number one guy, to go from that to being 220 yards and 4 touchdowns in the NFC Championship game. So let's just start from the very beginning. Since 2015, going undrafted, Mostert has been cut by 6 teams, and it was shown a lot and talked about a lot in the NFC Championship against the Packers. Along with the Eagles, Browns, Jets, the list goes on and on, the Ravens as well. He's been cut by all these teams. And he reached a point, after that Browns cut, where he said, is this even going to be worth it? Is it really worth getting cut by another team? Because this hurts more and more as we go. And his wife talking to him about the fact that if you love this game, if you love football that much, you're going to stick with it. You're going to stay with the program. It's God's plan. And here he is. After he even got to the 49ers, he wasn't the number one guy. We talk about those guys that are in front of him throughout the years. Carlos Hyde in those early years with the 49ers. Now with Tevin Coleman, Matt Breida being those 1 and 2 dynamic duos. And yet we find ourselves in the NFC Championship where Matt Breida is having fumble issues, so he doesn't really get much of the snaps. Tevin Coleman was the star in the previous game against the Vikings, and yet he gets injured with an arm injury. And now it's up to Raheem Mostert. So 3 guys. We love that the 49ers do a 2-back set. Well, now 2 of those backs are gone, or you don't want to use them, and it's up to Raheem Mostert to really take the load. And not having that opportunity at all in those early seasons, you find yourself in a tough situation where he even said that he didn't believe he could do a performance like he did against the Packers. 220 yards, 4 touchdowns. And he could have gone more. I think he had 160 yards by the halftime. And yet he still had 2 full quarters to go. He could have gone 300. I guarantee he could have, because he was just running it down their throats with ease against a really good Green Bay Packers defense this year. And yet we look at those guys he was behind and the guys that he never got a chance to play for. Even in that early season with the 49ers, he played 1 game in his first season with the 49ers. The next year, he played 11, but didn't get many snaps. He was just active. How can you say a guy like that would stay on a team and yet find himself in the Super Bowl being a key part of how the 49ers can win a Super Bowl without him? Guarantee you, if they don't have Raheem Mostert in the NFC Championship, who knows? Matt Breida would have been in there. He would have had a good performance, or he would have fumbled, just because they wouldn't have trusted him in that process. However, to go from being undrafted, to go from being cut by 6 teams in a matter of 2 years, and the fact that he wanted to quit football in general, to now being a key part of that 49ers offense, and it's up to really him to be a key contributor to the 49ers winning that Super Bowl. It's very similar, and I keep making this comparison to last year's New England Patriots team with Sony Michel. There's many comparisons. Mostert came out of Purdue. He had a good career at Purdue. Same thing with Sony Michel. He had a good career at Georgia as a Bulldog, and he was behind Todd Gurley. He was behind Nick Chubb. He was the 3rd guy to really get his chance. And he's not the fastest guy. Both of these guys, not the fastest, not the most agile, not the smartest, yet you feel like they're just good. They're just perfect for that system. You don't have to be a Todd Gurley. You don't have to be a Ezekiel Elliott to make it far into the playoffs and be a key contributor to the running game. Tevin Coleman, Matt Breida are good. So is Raheem Mostert. Sony Michel, you can add those names to it. We've seen that the best running back in these playoffs was Derrick Henry. He didn't show up at all, or he didn't have a great performance in that AFC Championship game. So you don't have to have the Pro Bowl running back. You don't have to. You have a great guy like Mostert that comes in, has a background of being the underdog and being doubted. He has a lot to prove. And so did Sony Michel last year. He had a lot to prove in a system that doesn't really focus on running backs. But do your job, do what you have to do, and you could be holding that Lombardi trophy and bringing it back to San Francisco. The fact that Mostert is still in the league, being cut 6 times and he runs for 200 yards, or 200 yards plus, 4 touchdowns, in an NFC Championship game where you force your quarterback to throw only 8 times. You don't have to throw it if you're running the ball with Mostert. That's the whole Kyle Shanahan game plan in that AFC Championship. So next story up is going to be one of my favorites, is Katie Sowers, the offensive assistant coach on the San Francisco 49ers, who was hired in 2017 as that coach, is going to be the 2nd woman overall in the NFL's history to be a coach in the NFL, but first women's coach to be in the Super Bowl, and first openly gay coach to be in the Super Bowl as well. Now, I'm not really going to focus on that. She's a great role model for the LBGT community. However, that should not be a part of why this is important. It should be a part of how, sexist and how equality is needed in the NFL and sports in general. We've seen it in basketball with the San Antonio Spurs. We see it now with the San Francisco 49ers. And we've seen it with referees as well. I believe that the first woman to be a referee in the NFL will be coaching during the Super Bowl. I may need to confirm on that. Yet the fact that she is, not only the first woman to be a coach in the Super Bowl, the fact that she has a very high level and importance on that coaching staff, like she knows her stuff. And one of the biggest struggles was the fact that most men think that women don't know a lot about sports in general, and even football, because they don't know the sport. They haven't played the sport. Well, Katie Sowers knows the sport. She's played the sport, not at the NFL level, but she's been doubted and been criticized, being pushed around that you can't play football against the big guys, you can't play football against men, and women don't play football. Well, how about the fact that she's played in the Women's Football Alliance for 8 years with 2 different teams. Her first stint in the NFL was actually as a Falcons athletic director, and she was found by the one of the executives for the Atlanta Falcons at around the same time, because she was a head coach for a basketball team, like a middle school, high school team, and then she moved her way up from there. She became like a wide receiver coach for the Atlanta Falcons, and she built that relationship with Kyle Shanahan. And once Kyle Shanahan moved to the 49ers, he thought he was a great addition in 2017 along with the other guys. John Lynch, Robert Saleh. You put Katie Sowers in that conversation, who found herself in a Microsoft commercial during the NFC Championship. So good for her, man. Like, I'm excited to see what she does. And if the 49ers win, even after that, if they lose, get a press conference to get word on Katie Sowers. And talk about the experience, like being on the field with all those men, being one of the only few women that contribute a lot to the Super Bowl and contribute to a lot to a team, is a phenomenal achievement to do. And I wish nothing but the best for her and for all the women that she's going to inspire to go into football, to be a coach, to not only like think about playing, but be a key mind in an organization. It's a great story to tell. And most people know about it now, but I just want to remind you, like, this is huge. This is history, that a woman is going to be a coach in the Super Bowl. And let's say, like, on Monday morning, we look back at it and we say she is the first woman to win a Super Bowl. That will go down in history and definitely put her as a Hall of Fame candidate. Second to last story to talk about is the 49ers organization itself. 2017 was the year for the 49ers because of the fact that in that year they went 4-12. They went 2-14 in 2016, and they actually did it with Chip Kelly. Do you remember Chip Kelly? No, you do not, because I didn't either. I remember him as the Philadelphia's coach. I don't remember him as the 49ers coach. That was a sad year for the San Francisco 49ers. So, rock bottom. And we all know what we do with rock bottom. The only way to go is up. That's the mentality to look for. 2-14, how much worse can it get with a Chip Kelly offense that doesn't transfer over to the NFL? So then 2017, they hire John Lynch as their GM. A great executive, soon to be Hall of Famer at that point. Kyle Shanahan is going to be the coach, the offensive coordinator for the Atlanta Falcons, who just came off an MVP Matt Ryan year. He gets his stint as the first head coach in his career, his first stint as a head coach in his career. Son of Mike Shanahan, Hall of Famer, great family tree to come from. And then he brings in Robert Saleh as well. Great defensive line. You bring in Richard Sherman. All these things are coming together. And you bring in Katie Sowers. Let's not forget about that. You bring all these people in. You bring all these key factors in an organization and front office that it's a good route to start with, but it does need time to grow. And the patience that they had, because they went from 2-14 to the next year 6-10. An improvement, but still not above 500. Then you go 4-12 again, which is not a good incline. Not at all. And yet, the patience, because a lot of teams would give up at that point if they say, hey, if we go up and we see a slow incline, Good. If we don't see that, we see a decline, we're going to give up. We're going to look for another head coach. But the patience of John Lynch, the patience of Kyle Shanahan to say, look, we have a lot to work with. We have a lot to work for in this organization, especially with rebuilding a defense, making an offense in general, and just adding on to that. You know, we talk about the front office of adding John Lynch, of Shanahan, of Saleh and Sowers, like all these different, factors. Then they start going with the players. They acquire Jimmy Garoppolo a few years later. Richard Sherman just later that year. George Kittle was drafted for the San Francisco 49ers in the 5th round. Nick Bosa, just a year ago, they drafted him at a high draft pick. These guys start to come together, and we're not forgetting about the running backs. We're not forgetting about the offensive line, or even that front seven of like Quan Alexander, of Dee Ford, Nick Bosa, like I mentioned. This took time to go from 2-14 to now being in the Super Bowl and being the number 1 team in the NFL alongside the Chiefs. That is a huge, huge roller coaster ride you have to go through, and a exponential growth to go through in just a matter of 3 seasons. Great job by John Lynch to be patient. A great mind, and he's done everything right. Kyle Shanahan to be in his first head coaching stint and to do it at such a high level, to be the motivational guy, to be one of those few around the league, to be like a Sean McVay, an offensive-minded coach, but to know that he needs a defensive side as well, and he needs to take care of that coaching. But to go along with the front office, him at such a young age and be a young, rising coach in this league, there's not many. Even Sean McVay had his downs, and he had one this year to not be in the playoffs. And Kyle Shanahan needed those first 4 years to really get a reality check as far as being a head coach, but finally getting in the rhythm, finally getting it together and find the right path to success, and now they're paying dividends for that. Being in the Super Bowl, and they may be the underdog because of the fact that the Chiefs offense is so great. However, defense wins championships. And if you have a team like Robert Saleh's defense and you have a solid offensive-minded Kyle Shanahan team, the balance is there, man. They can shock a lot of people and bring back a San Francisco 49ers Lombardi Trophy, the 6th one in their organization's history. So it's doable. It's completely possible. Think of just those hard years of the Chip Kelly, the Jim Tom Sula, those late Kaepernick years where all your teammates, all your media was talking about was the national anthem and kneeling during the national anthem, and yet finding yourself in the Super Bowl now and saying, we are the best team out of the NFC and we are one of the best teams in the NFL. To go from bad years to now this, it's a tough thing to do in a matter of 3 years, and that's what the 49ers did. And great job by them. On the other side of the pond, we end it with the reason why I want to see the Chiefs win, and a lot of people don't talk about this, is Andy Reid. He is under the Mike Holmgren tree, who has won a Super Bowl. His tree himself features John Harbaugh, Doug Peterson, Ron Rivera, Sean McDermott, the list goes on and on, Todd Bowles as well. Those 2 guys, John Harbaugh, Doug Peterson, have Super Bowl rings because they've been a head coach themselves. They've had success elsewhere. The man has been coaching since 1982 as a graduate assistant at BYU. Fun fact for you. Fun fucking fact for the day, because I was doing research on this and I never fucking knew this. Andy Reid was an offensive lineman coach at UTEP from 1986 to 1987. Crazy to think that happened because I did not know that. But Andy Reid has Miner blood in him because he was an offensive lineman coach. Go Miners. Right? And he's been coaching ever since. Being with the Eagles for so long. Making it to the Super Bowl in 2004, where he fell short against the New England Patriots, and having that great history with with the Philadelphia Eagles, with Donovan McNabb, Michael Vick, Terrell Owens, great players, yet never getting to that pinnacle of winning a championship. Then he goes to the Chiefs, and still the creative mind, still the West Coast offensive-minded guy that is creative, that is going to be high octane, high paced, and making it to the AFC Championship last year, but falling short at home against New England Patriots again. However, there's no New England Patriots this year, and you have one more game to play. You have one more chance to make Andy Reid one of the greatest coaches of all time. He really is. He is hands down one of the greatest coaches of all time. Yet that one thing that's holding him back from greatness is that championship ring, is that one Super Bowl. This man has 22 wins in the playoffs. He has one of the highest amounts of wins in the playoffs, yet doesn't have that one win that matters the most. So you have a tree where you come from where there's Super Bowls. You have a tree that you've grown yourself in assistants that have Super Bowls. But you yourself are that one little asterisk that doesn't have a Super Bowl. Andy Reid, well respected, has a great team around him that is built on offense. However, has built a defensive-minded team again with Steve Spagnuolo, and they showed great defensive play in these last few games in the playoffs. You know, going down 24 points and yet coming back from that to score 51, and then going down against the Titans a week later, doesn't matter. And then you find yourself right now as a good balanced team as well. Not as good as the San Francisco 49ers, yet it's going to be a great matchup. So Andy Reid, if he can get that Super Bowl, man, if he can get that Super Bowl, hold that Lombardi trophy, it'd be amazing. It'd be really amazing for him to solidify his greatness and solidify his story with that Lombardi trophy and to prove to everyone he's at the level of Bill Belichick. He's at the level of Bill Parcells, of Bill Belichick. He is at that same level. He just needs that one ring at least to prove it. And if he can win it this year, who's to say that he can't win 2 or 3 more with Patrick Mahomes as his quarterback? He can do it. You just need that one. All it takes is one, kid. Right? Yeah. All it takes one, kid. All right. So that's 5 stories that will determine the Super Bowl this weekend. Once again, we talked about it earlier this week. There's going to be a live stream of the podcast, a watch along for the Super Bowl with Eddie and I. And make sure to tune in for that. Just stop by and say hi or donate, subscribe, whatever. And we'll shout you out on the live stream. We'll have some fun. We'll eat some food. We'll watch some great football. And I hope you can join me on that journey. Hope you can join me on that day because we have the day off, boys. I don't usually get Sundays off, but being the sports guy, I have a podcast. This podcast saved us, right? My manager was like, hey, I gave you the Super Bowl off. My man. All right, so make sure to join us on Sunday, and thank you for watching and listening to this day's edition of the Bubba Lutz Sports Podcast. Have a great rest of your Thursday, a rest of your week, and we'll see you next time. Well, we're actually gonna come back tomorrow on Friday to talk about our prediction for the Super Bowl itself. So thank you for joining, and we'll see you next time.